June 6th, 1944. 7:25 in the morning, the coast of Normandy, France. The metal ramps of landing craft drop open with loud clangs that echo across the water. Cold ocean spray hits the faces of soldiers packed inside. They can smell salt water mixed with oil and gasoline. Their stomachs turn from hours of riding rough waves. Many have already been sick. Now they must step forward into the unknown. At a beach called Omaha, American soldiers wade into the surf. The water is 4 feet deep and ice cold. It soaks through their uniforms in seconds. Some men can barely move because their packs are so heavy. Then the machine guns start firing. The sound is like angry hornets mixed with thunder. Bullets hit the water and make little splashes that look almost peaceful. But these splashes mean death. Men start falling. The water around them turns red. Bodies float in the waves. Soldiers try to run forward, but they cannot move fast enough in the deep water. More men fall. The beach ahead is covered with obstacles made of steel and wood. Behind those obstacles are concrete bunkers with guns pointing directly at the Americans. Smoke fills the air. The smell of explosives burns their noses. Men are shouting, but no one can hear over the noise of battle. Some soldiers make it to the sand, but they cannot go any farther. They lie flat against the beach, pressed against a wall of stones, trying not to get hit. Dead men are everywhere. The living are trapped. They cannot move forward, and they cannot go back. The water behind them is full of more soldiers coming in, more targets for the German guns. 5 miles away, at a beach called Juno, Canadian soldiers face the same kind of defenses. The same concrete bunkers, the same machine guns, the same obstacles in the water, the same German soldiers waiting to kill them. The waves are even rougher here, 5 or 6 feet high. The current is stronger. Landing craft crash into hidden obstacles and blow up. Men are thrown into the water. But something different is happening at Juno Beach. Within just a few hours, Canadian soldiers will be miles inland, walking through French villages, pushing toward their goals. They will go farther than any other Allied soldiers on this day. Meanwhile, their American friends at Omaha Beach will still be stuck on the sand, barely holding on, wondering if they will survive. Both groups of soldiers are fighting the same enemy. Both are attacking the same kind of defenses. Both are brave men willing to die for freedom. So why is one group winning while the other is barely surviving? Why are Canadians breaking through while Americans are trapped in a nightmare? The answer is not about courage. Both beaches have heroes fighting and dying. The answer is about something else, something decided months before this terrible morning. Something about plans and tactics and lessons learned the hard way. This is June 6th, 1944, the day history calls D-Day. It is the largest invasion from the sea that the world has ever seen. More than 150,000 soldiers are hitting the beaches of France this morning. They are landing on 5 different beaches spread across 50 miles of coastline. The beaches have code names: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Each beach is protected by the Atlantic Wall, a line of defenses built by Germany over 4 years. There are concrete bunkers that can survive direct hits from bombs. There are guns big enough to destroy ships. There are machine gun nests with overlapping fields of fire so that no place on the beach is safe. There are obstacles in the water designed to rip open landing craft. There are mines buried in the sand. There are miles and miles of barbed wire. The Germans have spent years building these defenses. They have used millions of tons of concrete. They have tested every firing angle. They know exactly where to aim to kill the most men. The intelligence report showed that both Omaha and Juno would be tough. Both had experienced German divisions defending them. Both had artillery that could reach far out into the water. Both had positions on high ground looking down at the beaches. At Omaha, the land rose up in cliffs 150 feet tall. There were only 5 narrow paths through these cliffs, and every path was covered by German guns. At Juno, the French towns along the coast had been turned into fortresses. Every house had a machine gun position. Every street was blocked. Every wall hid defenders. The waves were rough at both beaches. The currents were strong at both beaches. The timing had to be perfect at both beaches, or the whole invasion could fail. By the end of this day, the results will shock everyone. The Canadians at Juno Beach will control territory 7 miles deep. They will hold ground 9 miles wide. They will capture over 1,000 German prisoners. They will link up with British forces from the next beach over. They will be so far inland that they can see the outskirts of the city of Caen, one of the main goals for the entire invasion. Their casualties will be serious, with 340 men killed and 574 wounded. But compared to what they accomplished, these numbers will seem almost like a miracle. At Omaha Beach, the Americans will finally secure the cliffs by evening. But they will only control about 1 mile of ground. They will have over 2,000 casualties, more than twice what the Canadians suffered, even though the Canadians advanced 7 times farther. The beach at Omaha will be called a slaughterhouse, a killing field, a place where brave men died because the plan failed them. Survivors will say it was the worst day of their lives. Commanders will wonder if they should have called off the whole landing. How could 2 beaches, so similar in their defenses, so close together in distance, end with such different results? What did the Canadians do that the Americans did not? What choices made? The difference between success and disaster. The answers lie in the past, in lessons learned through blood and failure, and in the decisions made by men who refused to repeat the mistakes of history. The story of what happened at Juno Beach really begins 2 years earlier, on a different beach in a different failed invasion. To understand why the Canadians succeeded on June 6, 1944, you have to understand what happened to them on August 19, 1942. That was the day Canadian soldiers attacked the French port town of Dieppe. That was the day everything went wrong. That was the day the Canadians learned lessons written in blood. On that August morning in 1942, nearly 5,000 Canadian troops landed at Dieppe. The plan was to capture the port, destroy German defenses, and then leave before the Germans could respond with reinforcements. It sounded simple. It was a disaster. German machine guns fired from the cliffs above the beach. Canadian soldiers had nowhere to hide. The stones on the beach were too large for tanks to drive over. The naval bombardment was too short and too weak. Air support arrived late. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. By the end of the day, 916 Canadian soldiers were dead. Another 1,946 were prisoners. Out of every 10 Canadians who landed at Dieppe, nearly 7 were killed, wounded, or captured. Families back in Canada received telegrams telling them their sons and husbands would never come home. The nation mourned. But the survivors remembered everything. The men who escaped from Dieppe came back with hard lessons. They said the bombardment from ships needed to be much longer and much heavier. They said infantry soldiers needed tanks right beside them from the first second on the beach, not waiting offshore or arriving later. They said regular tanks were not enough because regular tanks could not break through concrete walls or clear mines quickly. They said the timing of the landing had to account for tides and currents perfectly, or landing craft would hit obstacles and sink. They said junior officers and sergeants needed to be trained to make decisions on their own because battle plans always fall apart. Canadian commanders Major General Rod Keller and Brigadier Ben Cunningham listened to every word. They studied every mistake. They vowed that Canadian soldiers would never again be sent into battle so poorly prepared. By 1944, the Allies were ready to invade France again, but this time properly. The invasion would be much bigger than Dieppe. Instead of one small port, they would attack 5 beaches at once across 50 miles of coastline. The Americans were given 2 beaches. The British were given 2 beaches. The Canadians were given Juno Beach, right in the middle. The American beaches were named Utah and Omaha. Omaha Beach was assigned to the United States 1st Infantry Division and the 29th Infantry Division. These were good units. The 1st Infantry Division had fought in North Africa and Sicily. They were experienced, but many soldiers in both divisions had never been in combat before. They were about to learn the hardest way possible. Juno Beach was given to the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division and the 2nd Canadian Armored Brigade. These units were built around the men who survived Dieppe. Every officer, every sergeant, every soldier who had been through that nightmare now had a chance to do it right. They trained harder than any other Allied units. They practiced combined attacks where tanks and infantry worked together like one machine. They studied aerial photographs of Juno Beach until they could see the German positions in their sleep. They knew where every bunker was. They knew where every gun position was located. They memorized the tide tables and the current speeds. Nothing would be left to chance this time. The Germans defending both beaches were tough opponents. At Omaha Beach, the German 352nd Infantry Division held the high ground. This unit had 12,000 experienced soldiers. They had spent months improving their defenses. The Americans did not know until too late that this division had moved into position just weeks before D-Day. Allied intelligence thought weaker units defended Omaha. They were wrong. At Juno Beach, the German 716th Infantry Division held the coastline. Many of these soldiers were not German at all. They were Eastern Europeans forced to fight for Germany. These men did not want to die for Hitler. But behind them was the 21st Panzer Division, one of Germany's best armored units, and the concrete fortifications were just as strong at Juno as anywhere else. The Germans had built bunkers that could survive direct hits from battleship guns. They had artillery that could reach 3 miles out to sea. They had machine guns positioned so their fire overlapped, creating zones where nothing could survive. The American plan for Omaha Beach relied on overwhelming firepower. Naval ships would bombard the German positions for 35 minutes. Then waves of infantry would land and walk inland while the Germans were still stunned from the shelling. To support the infantry, the Americans planned to use special swimming tanks called DD tanks, which stood for duplex drive. These were Sherman tanks with canvas skirts that let them float. The idea was to launch them from ships 3 miles offshore and let them swim to the beach. It was clever in theory. In practice, the rough seas on D-Day would sink 27 out of 32 of these tanks. The men inside drowned. The Canadian plan was different in every important way. Based on Dieppe's lessons, the Canadians demanded a longer bombardment, over 1 hour instead of 35 minutes. They refused to launch tanks from far offshore. Instead, Canadian tanks would ride in landing craft all the way to the beach and drive off into the sand. These brought specialized armored vehicles that the British engineer Percy Hobart had designed. These funnies included tanks with chain flails that beat the ground to explode mines. They included tanks that could shoot huge explosive charges to destroy concrete bunkers. They included tanks that shot flames. The Canadians also delayed their landing time by 10 minutes compared to the original plan. This delay would account for stronger currents and higher waves. Every detail mattered. Every lesson from Dieppe was applied. In a few hours, the world would see if learning from failure could lead to victory. At 6:30 in the morning, the naval bombardment of Omaha Beach stops. The big guns from the ships go silent. Smoke drifts across the water. The plan says the German positions should be destroyed now. The plan says the concrete bunkers should be smashed and the German soldiers should be too stunned to fight back. The plan is wrong. As the first American landing craft approached the beach, German machine guns open fire. The guns are untouched. The bunkers are undamaged. Every German position is exactly where it was before the bombardment started. The shells missed. Company A of the 116th Infantry Regiment hits the beach first. Within minutes, 96 out of every 100 men in the company are dead or wounded. The ramps drop and soldiers step into water that is chest deep. They try to run forward, but the weight of their equipment pulls them down. Machine gun bullets hit the water all around them. Some men are hit before they take 3 steps. Others make it 10 or 20 feet before they fall. The water turns red. Bodies float in the surf. Men who are still alive try to use the bodies as cover. The noise is incredible, a constant roar of gunfire, and explosions and men screaming. The soldiers who reach the beach cannot move beyond the waterline. There is a wall of stones called the shingle about 50 yards from the water. It is 3 or 4 feet high. Men crawl toward it, dragging wounded friends, leaving trails of blood in the sand. German mortars drop shells onto the beach. The explosions throw up fountains of sand and rocks. Medics try to help the wounded, but many medics are shot while treating patients. Officers stand up to give orders and are immediately killed. The bodies pile up against the shingle. There is no room to move. More landing craft arrive every few minutes, bringing more men into the killing zone. Behind the beach, German soldiers look down from cliffs that rise 150 feet into the air. They have perfect views of everything happening below. Their guns are positioned in concrete bunkers with narrow slits for firing. American bullets cannot hurt them. The Germans have spent years preparing these positions. They know exactly where to aim. They have measured every distance. They have marked the ranges on their guns. Every yard of beach is covered by at least 2 machine guns. When Americans try to move, the Germans cut them down. There are only 5 ways off Omaha Beach. These are narrow valleys called draws that cut through the cliffs. Every draw is blocked by wire, mines, and concrete walls. Every draw has machine guns and artillery aimed directly at it. The Americans must get through these draws, or they will be trapped on the beach. But getting through seems impossible. By 8:30 in the morning, more than 2,000 Americans are pinned down on Omaha Beach. General Omar Bradley is on a ship offshore watching through binoculars. He considers calling off the landing and evacuating everyone. The invasion might fail right here. Meanwhile, 5 miles to the east, Canadian soldiers are preparing to land at Juno Beach. The time is 7:35 in the morning, more than an hour after the Americans landed at Omaha. The waves are even rougher at Juno. The water is choppy with white caps. Waves reach 5 or 6 feet high. The current is stronger than anyone predicted. Men inside the landing craft are soaked with spray and sick from the constant motion. They can see the French coastline ahead through the morning mist. They can see the church steeples of small towns. They know German soldiers are waiting in those towns with guns ready. The landing craft head toward 2 main towns, Courseulles-sur-Mer and Bernières-sur-Mer. Both towns have been turned into fortresses. Every 100 yards along the beach there is a concrete strongpoint with thick walls and heavy guns. Wire entanglements stretch across the sand. Mines are buried everywhere. 75-millimeter guns are positioned to fire along the length of the beach, so their shells can hit anything that moves. The Germans have prepared this beach just as carefully as they prepared Omaha. They are ready to kill as many Canadians as possible. But something different happens at Juno Beach. As the landing craft reach the shore, they do not just drop off infantry. They drop off tanks. Sherman tanks roll down the ramps and onto the sand. Some of these tanks have special equipment. Some have chains on rotating drums in front that beat the ground to explode mines. Some have huge mortars that can fire massive explosive charges. Some have flamethrowers. These specialized tanks move forward immediately, not waiting for infantry to clear the way. They blast paths through the obstacles. They fire at the German bunkers. They give the infantry something to hide behind. The Queen's own rifles land directly in front of a German strongpoint at Bernier. Machine guns open fire immediately. 68 Canadian soldiers are killed in the first few minutes. The beach is covered with bodies just like at Omaha. Men dive for cover behind beach obstacles and dead tanks. The smell of explosives and blood fills the air. But the tanks keep moving. The specialized armor breaks through the wire. Engineers run forward with explosives to blow holes in the concrete walls. Infantry soldiers work in small groups, covering each other as they advance. At Courcelles, the Royal Winnipeg Rifles face similar horror. German artillery pounds the beach from positions inland that the naval bombardment could not reach. Landing craft hit underwater obstacles and explode. Men are thrown into the water and drown under the weight of their equipment. The rough seas delay some landing craft, causing units to bunch together under fire. For the first hour, casualties at Juno approach the terrible rate seen at Omaha. The Canadians are dying just as fast as the Americans. The question is whether they can turn the situation around before it becomes another Dieppe. Everything hangs in the balance as smoke drifts across both beaches and the sound of battle echoes across the English Channel. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the situation at Omaha Beach is desperate. Thousands of American soldiers lie pressed against the shingle wall, unable to move forward. Dead men are scattered across the sand. Wounded men cry out for help. The tide is rising, which means the beach is getting smaller. Soon the water will reach the shingle, and there will be nowhere left to hide. Officers try to organize attacks, but most officers are already dead or wounded. The German machine guns fire constantly. The sound never stops. Some American soldiers have been on the beach for 2.5 hours without firing their weapons. They are too pinned down to fight back. They can only survive. Then individual acts of courage begin to change the battle. Colonel George Taylor of the 16th Infantry Regiment stands up on the beach. Bullets snap past his head. He shouts at the men around him. His words will become famous. He says there are two kinds of people staying on this beach, those who are dead and those who are going to die. Now let's get the hell out of here. His words cut through the fear. Men start to move. Not in organized waves like the plan said, just small groups. 5 men here, 10 men there. They pick a target, usually a single German position, and they attack it. Sergeants and corporals lead these small groups, because most of the officers are gone. They crawl through the sand. They use smoke from burning equipment to hide their movement. They throw grenades into bunker openings. They shoot at the narrow slits in the concrete walls. When one group takes out a machine gun position, another group moves forward to attack the next one. The progress is slow. Men die with every yard gained. But for the first time all morning, the Americans are moving up instead of sideways. Out on the water, Navy destroyer captains make a bold decision. They are supposed to stay at least a mile from shore where their ships are safe from German artillery. Instead, they drive their ships as close as they can get without running aground. Some destroyers get so close that their hulls scrape the bottom. The big naval guns point almost straight up to hit targets on the cliffs. The shells are so large that when they hit, the explosions shake the ground like earthquakes. German bunkers that survived hours of bombardment are finally destroyed by these close-range shots. The destroyers give the infantry a chance to move. Engineers work frantically to blow gaps in the barbed wire using explosives. They mark safe paths through the minefields with white tape. They work under constant fire. Many are killed while trying to clear obstacles. But slowly, the beach starts to have passed through it. At the base of the cliffs, rangers are climbing straight up the rock faces using ropes and ladders. They carry 70 pounds of equipment on their backs while climbing. German soldiers at the top drop grenades on them. The rangers keep climbing. Some fall to their deaths. Others make it to the top and start fighting the Germans from behind their positions. But even with all this courage, progress at Omaha Beach is measured in yards, not miles. By noon, 4.5 hours after the first wave landed, the Americans control only 100 to 200 yards of depth from the waterline. They have gained less than 2 football fields. The cliffs still tower above them. Most of the German guns are still firing. Thousands more American soldiers are landing every hour, piling onto a beach that is still very much a combat zone. The smell of death is everywhere. Smoke makes it hard to see. The sound of battle continues without pause. At Juno Beach, 9:30 in the morning marks a different kind of turning point. The Canadians are using 3 critical advantages that the Americans at Omaha do not have. The first advantage is immediate armored support. Canadian tanks do not wait on the beach. They do not swim in from far away only to sink. They drive right off the landing craft onto the sand and push inland alongside the infantry. The Fort Garry Horse, a Canadian armored regiment, leads the way. Their tanks crush barbed wire under their treads. They destroy bunkers by driving right up to them and firing into the gun slits at point-blank range. When infantry gets pinned down by machine gun fire, tanks draw the fire away. The Germans shoot at the big metal targets instead of the soldiers. This gives the infantry time to move and flank the German positions. The specialized tanks are even more important. The Churchill Avro tanks carry huge mortars that fire charges called flying dustbins. These charges weigh 290 millimeters and can punch through 3 feet of concrete. When a bunker stops the advance, an Avro drives up and fires directly at it. The explosion is enormous. The bunker collapses, or the Germans inside surrender. The crab tanks with mine-clearing chains move ahead of the infantry, beating the ground with spinning chains. Mines explode harmlessly in front of them instead of under soldiers' feet. In just 1 hour, these specialized tanks clear more obstacles than American engineers clear all morning at Omaha. The second Canadian advantage is aggressive junior leadership. The men who survived Dieppe taught their sergeants and lieutenants an important lesson. Do not wait for orders. Do not wait for the plan to work. Act now. Lieutenant William Reynolds shows exactly what this means. His platoon is supposed to attack a German strongpoint from the front. Reynolds sees that approach will get all his men killed. He does not radio for permission to change the plan. He simply leads his men around the side of the strongpoint. They move through a garden behind a French house. They come up behind the German position and attack from the rear. The surprised Germans surrender. Reynolds doesn't wait for the rest of his company to catch up. He keeps pushing inland. Other Canadian junior officers do the same thing all along the beach. They see opportunities and take them. They do not wait to be told what to do. The third advantage is battlefield adaptation. When mines and obstacles slow the advance, Canadian engineers and infantry work together to solve problems on the spot. When German resistance gets stronger in one area, artillery observers call for naval gunfire with incredible accuracy. The ships offshore fire at targets only a few hundred yards in front of Canadian troops. When tanks move too far ahead and lose contact with infantry, the tank commanders stop and wait, using their guns to cover the infantry advance, rather than racing ahead alone. Everything works together like a machine where every part knows its job. By 11 o'clock in the morning, the difference between the two beaches is stark and undeniable. At Omaha Beach, American forces are still fighting to get off the sand. They are making progress, but they are nowhere near their objectives. At Juno Beach, Canadian units are already 2 to 3 miles inland. The Regina Rifles have captured the town of WWII and the village of Bigny-sur-Mer. The North Shore Regiment is pushing toward Tailleville. The 1st Hussars, another Canadian armored regiment, has reached the Caen-Bayeux railway line. This is farther inland than any other Allied unit will reach on D-Day, not just at Juno Beach, anywhere. The Canadians have broken through Hitler's Atlantic Wall and are driving deep into France, while others are still fighting on the beaches. By 6 o'clock in the evening on June 6, 1944, the sun is starting to go down over the beaches of Normandy. The day has been the longest and bloodiest that most soldiers will ever experience. At Omaha Beach, American forces have finally secured the high ground. They control the cliffs that German soldiers held all morning. They have fought for every inch of this ground. Every yard cost blood. After 12 hours of continuous battle, they hold approximately 1 mile of territory from the waterline inland. This is far less than what the plan called for. The plan said they should be 5 miles inland by evening. Instead, they barely hold the ground directly behind the beach. The cost has been terrible. More than 2,000 American soldiers are dead or wounded. The exact number will take days to count because bodies are scattered everywhere. Some are still in the water, washing back and forth with the tide. Some are buried under sand from shell explosions. Some are in places too dangerous to reach because German snipers still control certain areas. The wounded fill every available building behind the beach. Medics work without rest, trying to save lives with limited supplies. Many wounded men will not survive the night because there are too many casualties and not enough medical help. Supplies are piled high on the beach, but there is nowhere to move them. Ammunition boxes, food crates, medical equipment, and fuel cans sit in stacks near the waterline. The beach is so narrow and so crowded that nothing can move efficiently. Vehicles that made it ashore sit bumper to bumper. Some are damaged, some are stuck in the sand. Some are just waiting for space to drive inland, but there is no space. The smell of explosives, burning equipment, and death hangs over everything. Smoke drifts across the beach from fires that still burn. The sound of sporadic gunfire continues as small battles rage in the hills beyond the cliffs. General Omar Bradley sends a message to Supreme Commander Eisenhower. The message is short and honest. Landing successful, but hold is precarious. These words do not capture the horror of what happened. They do not describe the fear, the chaos, the desperate courage of men who kept coming forward despite watching their friends die. Survivors will later describe Omaha Beach in much harsher terms. They call it the worst day of their lives. They call it a slaughterhouse. They call it a miracle that anyone survived. Many will never speak about this day again. The memories are too painful. The nightmares will last for decades. 5 miles east at Juno Beach, the scene is completely different. Canadian forces hold territory that stretches 7 miles inland from the waterline. The width of their control spans 9 miles along the coast. They have captured every town and village in their path. Bernières-sur-Mer is in Canadian hands. Courseulles-sur-Mer is secured. Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer, Grès-sur-Mer, Bigny-sur-Mer, and Rivière all fly Allied flags now. French civilians come out of their homes crying with joy. They hug Canadian soldiers. They offer wine and bread. Children run alongside Canadian tanks. Old men and women who have lived under German occupation for 4 years finally see freedom. The Canadians are not just near their objectives. They have reached the Caen-Bayeux Railway and are within sight of the city of Caen itself. This is the deepest Allied penetration of D-Day. No other force, British or American, has pushed this far inland. The Canadians have also captured over 1,000 German prisoners. These men sit in groups under guard, many looking relieved that the fighting is over for them. Canadian casualties are serious. 340 men killed, 574 wounded, and 47 captured. Every loss is mourned. Every family that will receive a telegram deserves grief. But compared to what the Canadians achieved, and compared to the casualties at Omaha Beach, these numbers represent a kind of terrible success. The Canadians landed 21,400 troops. Their casualty rate is about 4.5%. The Americans landed 34,000 troops at Omaha. Their casualty rate is almost 6%. The Canadians advanced 7 times farther with fewer losses per soldier. German commanders are shocked by what happened at Juno Beach. General Wilhelm Richter commands the German 716th Infantry Division defending this area. His reports describe the Canadian penetration as the most dangerous Allied breakthrough of the day. At Omaha Beach, early German reports suggested they might actually throw the Americans back into the sea. But at Juno, German commanders know immediately they are in serious trouble. They send urgent messages requesting reinforcements. They need help now, or the Canadians will break through completely. Allied forces intercept some of these German communications. The messages reveal German surprise and confusion. One intercepted report says the enemy employs specialized armor never before encountered. Infantry advances with tanks in combined arms coordination. We cannot stop with our static defenses. The Germans have never seen anything like the Canadian tactics. Their concrete bunkers cannot handle tanks that drive right up to them. Their machine gun positions cannot stop infantry that works together with armor. Their mines are defeated by special tanks with chains. Everything they built to stop an invasion is being overcome by Canadian innovation and training. As night falls, the two beaches show stark contrasts. At Omaha Beach, American soldiers sleep among the dead. They huddle in shell holes and behind the shingle wall. They are exhausted beyond description. Many have not eaten all day. Many are still wet from the landing. They expect a German counterattack during the night. Officers try to organize defensive positions, but it is difficult in the darkness. Men do not know where their units are. Companies that landed with 200 men now have 50 or fewer. Communication is difficult. Radio equipment was lost or damaged. Runners have to carry messages on foot. Everyone wonders if they can hold this ground if the Germans attack in force. Everyone wonders if tomorrow will be as bad as today. At Juno Beach, Canadian forces are 7 miles inland establishing defensive positions for the night. They have linked up with British forces from Gold Beach to their west. The connection means the Allied beachhead is continuous along this part of the coast, which is exactly what the invasion plans hope for. The Regina Rifles are digging foxholes near Carpiquet Airport, which was supposed to be a D-Day objective for the entire invasion. No one expected any unit to get this close on the first day. Canadian commanders meet to discuss what to do next. Some believe they should push forward and try to capture Caen tonight. The city looks vulnerable. German defenses seem disorganized. The momentum is with the Canadians. But British commanders deny permission. They fear the Canadians will become overextended. They worry about German counterattacks. The decision to halt for the night is made. Historians will later argue that this was a mistake, that the Canadians could have taken Caen on June 6th if allowed to try. Instead, the Battle of Caen will drag on for weeks at great cost. But on this night, the order stands. The Canadians dig in and wait for morning, proud of what they accomplished, but wondering what might have been possible if they had kept going. The success at Juno Beach creates immediate strategic benefits that ripple across the entire invasion. When Allied commanders look at maps showing where all their forces are positioned by the end of D-Day, they see something crucial. The Canadian penetration forms a wedge driven deep into German territory. This wedge is like a fist punching into the German defenses. It creates a salient, which is a bulge in the front line. This bulge threatens to surround German forces on either side. German commanders must now worry about Canadian troops moving behind their other positions. They cannot focus all their attention on one beach anymore. They must spread their forces thinner to cover more ground. This is exactly what the Allies need. The width and depth of territory secured by the Canadians also means the Allied beachhead is stronger than planners hoped. A beachhead is the area controlled right after an amphibious landing. It needs to be deep enough that German artillery cannot reach the beaches where more troops and supplies are landing. It needs to be wide enough that the Germans cannot simply walk around it. The Canadian success at Juno guarantees both. Supplies can be unloaded safely. Reinforcements can come ashore without immediately facing enemy fire. The entire invasion has a foundation to build on. If Juno had failed like Omaha nearly did, the whole operation might have collapsed. Most importantly, the Canadian breakthrough compensates for the American near disaster at Omaha Beach. For hours on June 6th, Supreme Commander Eisenhower and his staff worried the invasion might fail completely. If the Americans could not get off Omaha Beach, the Germans could concentrate their reserves against the other beaches. They could push the British and Canadians back into the sea. The entire war might have turned on those terrible hours. But because the Canadians succeeded so decisively, the Germans never got that chance. They had to defend everywhere at once. The first 48 hours after D-Day are critical. This is when the Germans must counterattack hard or lose their chance. The Canadian success means German counterattacks are spread out and weakened. The invasion survives its most vulnerable period. Military analysts immediately begin studying what happened at both beaches. They want to understand why two similar operations had such different results. The numbers tell a clear story. At Omaha Beach, the Americans planned to land special swimming tanks to support their infantry. 32 DD tanks were launched from ships. 27 sank in the rough seas. That means 85% of the armored support disappeared before reaching the beach. At Juno Beach, the Canadians landed their tanks directly on the beach from landing craft. 80% of Canadian armored vehicles successfully reached shore and went into action. The difference is obvious. Tanks that swim might sound clever, but tanks that actually arrive are better. The specialized armor proves essential. The Hobart's funnies that British engineers designed and that Canadians used are not just useful, they are life-saving. Churchill Avro tanks destroy bunkers that regular tanks cannot touch. Crab mine clearing tanks create safe paths through minefields in minutes instead of hours. Crocodile flamethrower tanks force German soldiers out of fortified positions. American commanders had been offered these specialized vehicles before D-Day. They turned them down. They thought regular American equipment was good enough. They were wrong. After seeing the results at Juno Beach compared to Omaha Beach, American military leaders realized their mistake. But this realization comes too late for the 2,000 casualties at Omaha. The training differences also become clear. Canadian forces practiced combined arms coordination for months. Combined arms means tanks, infantry, artillery, and engineers all working together as one team. At Juno Beach, when infantry gets pinned down, tanks immediately support them. When tanks face obstacles, engineers quickly clear paths. When either needs fire support, artillery observers call in naval guns with precision. Everything connects. At Omaha Beach, the plan assumed each part would work independently. Infantry would land first and clear the beach. Then tanks would arrive. Then engineers would clear obstacles. But when the plan failed, units did not know how to work together. They had not trained for it. Men improvised bravely, but improvisation under fire costs lives. The emphasis on junior leader initiative makes an enormous difference. Canadian sergeants and lieutenants are trained to make decisions without waiting for orders from above. When radios fail or officers die, these junior leaders keep the attack moving. They see opportunities and take them. They adapt to changing situations. At Omaha Beach, American soldiers are trained to follow orders and execute the plan. When the plan collapses and officers are killed, many units freeze. They wait for new orders that never come. Individual acts of courage eventually save the day. At Omaha, but it takes hours longer than it should. The Canadians teach the world that training junior leaders to think independently is not just good practice. It is essential for survival. The statistics paint a stark picture. Americans land 34,000 troops at Omaha Beach. They advance 1 mile inland. They suffer more than 2,000 casualties. This means they lose about 6 out of every 100 men. Canadians land 21,400 troops at Juno Beach. They advance 7 miles inland. They suffer 961 casualties. This means they lose about 4.5 out of every 100 men. The Canadians move 7 times farther with 35% fewer troops and a lower casualty rate. They also capture 50% more territory per soldier than the Americans. These numbers will be studied in military academies for decades. The morale impact spreads quickly through Allied forces. At Juno Beach, Canadian soldiers feel vindication. They avenge Dieppe. They proved that Canadians are not just Britain's colonials or America's northern neighbors. They are elite troops who can outfight anyone when properly trained and equipped. Canadian newspapers back home print headlines celebrating the victory. Dieppe avenge becomes a common phrase. Canadians lead Allied breakthrough appears in papers from Toronto to Vancouver. Families who lost sons at Dieppe 2 years earlier read that their sacrifice taught the lessons that saved lives at Juno. The grief remains, but it has meaning now. Among American troops at Omaha Beach, feelings are mixed. There is admiration for what the Canadians accomplished. There is also frustration and anger. Why did Canadian tactics work while American tactics failed? Why were Americans not given the same specialized equipment? Why was American training not as thorough? These questions create tension. Some American soldiers feel their leaders let them down. Some feel envious of Canadian success, but most simply respect that the Canadians did their job well. British commanders quietly take note. The Canadians have exceeded every expectation. They operated with independence and innovation that surprises everyone. Canada is emerging from this war not as a follower, but as a military leader in its own right. The long-term changes to military doctrine begin immediately. Within weeks, Allied forces adopt Canadian tactics across all operations. Specialized armored vehicles become standard equipment for beach assaults. Combined arms training becomes mandatory for all units. Junior leader initiative is emphasized in every military school. The practice of landing tanks directly on beaches instead of launching them offshore becomes universal policy. Every lesson learned at Juno Beach, purchased with Canadian blood and courage, becomes part of how modern militaries conduct Amphibious operations. The legacy will last 80 years and counting. Lieutenant Bill Little of the Queen's Own rifles lands at Bernières-sur-Mer in the first wave. He is 23 years old. His landing craft hits the beach at 7:35 in the morning. The ramp drops, and he sees the German machine gun position directly ahead. The gun is firing non-stop. Bullets hit the water and the ramp. Men start falling before they reach the sand. Little runs forward, screaming for his platoon to follow. He counts later and realizes 14 men from his platoon died in the first 60 seconds. 14 friends he trained with, ate with, laughed with, gone in 1 minute. Little sees the machine gun nest 50 yards ahead. It is made of concrete with sandbags piled around it. The gun barrel pokes through a narrow opening. Little has 3 men left with him. He does not think about what he is doing. He just runs toward the machine gun. His men follow. They throw grenades. The explosions are deafening. The machine gun stops firing. They reach the position and find 2 dead Germans inside and 1 wounded. Little's ears are ringing. His hands are shaking. But there's no time to stop. More machine guns are firing from deeper in the town. Little leads his 3 men forward. By nightfall, they have pushed 4 miles inland. Little is wounded twice during the day, but refuses to leave his men. He survives the war and returns to Canada. He becomes a school teacher in Toronto. For 40 years, he never speaks about D-Day, not to his wife, not to his children, not to anyone. Finally, in 1984, a student asks him about the war. Little is 63 years old now. He sits down and tells his story. When he finishes, he says the same thing many veterans say. We did our job, that's all. The boys who didn't come home, they're the real heroes. Private Charles Martin lands at Omaha Beach in the second wave. He is 19 years old from a small town in Virginia. As his landing craft approaches, he can see bodies floating in the water. He can see the beach is covered with dead and wounded men. His stomach churns with fear. The ramp drops. His sergeant steps off first and is immediately shot through the head. The sergeant falls backward onto Martin, knocking him down. Martin lies under the sergeant's body. He can feel warm blood soaking through his uniform. The machine gun keeps firing at the ramp. Martin stays perfectly still. He pretends to be dead. For 2 hours he lies under his sergeant's corpse while bullets snap overhead and men scream around him. Finally, the firing decreases slightly. Martin crawls out from under the body. It takes him 6 hours to crawl 50 yards to the shingle wall. He survives the war, but the nightmares never stop. In 1947, he writes in his diary that he should have died that day. He does not know why he didn't. He thinks about those men every single day for the rest of his life. Sergeant Leo Gariepi commands a Sherman tank in the 1st Hussars, a Canadian armored regiment. His tank is one of the first to push deep inland. By mid-afternoon, his tank has traveled 6 miles from the beach. They are farther than any other Allied unit. Near the town of Outy, Gariepi sees French civilians on the road. They are fleeing from Caen, trying to escape the fighting. Old people, women, and children walk with whatever they can carry. Gariepi's orders are to engage all targets that might be enemy soldiers, but these are clearly not soldiers. These are terrified families. Gariepi tells his crew not to fire. They let the civilians pass. His tank continues forward and destroys 3 German strongpoints that day. They capture 40 German soldiers who surrender without much fight. When the war ends, Gariepi goes home to Quebec and tries to forget. In 1984, he returns to France for the 40th anniversary of D-Day. An elderly French woman approaches him at a ceremony in Courseulles. She is crying. She tells him she remembers his tank arriving on June 6th. She was a young mother then, with 2 small children. A Canadian tanker gave her children chocolate. She never forgot that kindness in the middle of war. She named her son Leo after the soldier whose name she saw on his tank. Gariepi, now 65 years old, starts crying too. He had forgotten that moment. He only remembered the violence, the fear, the friends who died. But this woman remembered the humanity. They embrace in the street while cameras record the moment. Obergifreiter Friedrich Müller, called Fritz by his friends, defends a German strongpoint at Courcelles. He is 26 years old from Bavaria. He has fought on the Eastern Front at Stalingrad. He knows what war looks like when men show no mercy. When he sees Canadian tanks driving out of the ocean, he thinks he must be hallucinating. Tanks don't swim, he tells his comrades, but these tanks are real and they are coming fast. Fritz's bunker holds for 30 minutes. Then a Churchill Avra fires a massive explosive charge directly through their gun opening. The explosion is like being inside thunder. Fritz's ears bleed. Half his men are dead. He waves a white cloth and surrenders with 11 survivors. He expects to be shot. At Stalingrad, neither side took many prisoners, but the Canadian soldiers give them water. They share cigarettes. They call for medics to treat the German wounded. Fritz cannot believe it. Years later, he gives an interview to a historian. He says that at Stalingrad, we showed no mercy and expected none. But those Canadians could have killed us easily. They chose not to. That day, I learned the difference between soldiers and killers. Corporal Edward Bennett of the United States 1st Infantry Division is wounded 3 times at Omaha Beach. Each time, he crawls back to his squad to keep fighting. Finally, at 4 in the afternoon, other soldiers force him onto a medical evacuation boat. He returns to combat 48 hours later. He fights through France and into Germany. He survives the entire war. In 1994, he attends the 50th anniversary of D-Day. He meets Canadian veterans at a ceremony. A Canadian reporter asks what he thinks about the Canadian success at Juno compared to the American struggle at Omaha. Bennett is 70 years old now. He thinks carefully before answering. He says, "You boys did it right. We paid for our mistakes with blood. If we'd had your plan, your training, your tactics, maybe my friends would have survived." There is no bitterness in his voice, just honesty and sadness for what might have been. Today, if you visit the coast of Normandy, you can walk on both beaches where history was written in blood. At Courcelles-sur-Mer, where Canadian soldiers landed at Juno Beach, stands the Juno Beach Center. This museum opened in 2003, almost 60 years after D-Day. More than 100,000 people visit it every year. Outside the building sits a Churchill Avra tank, the same type that broke through German defenses on June 6, 1944. Information panels explain how specialized armor saved Canadian lives. The museum tells the story of tactical excellence, of lessons learned from failure, of innovation that changed how wars are fought. Visitors can walk inland from the beach through 7 miles of French countryside, following the path Canadian soldiers took in a single day. At Omaha Beach, the scene is different. The American cemetery sits on the bluffs overlooking the water. 9,387 white crosses and stars of David mark the graves of soldiers who died in Normandy. It is the largest American military cemetery in Europe. The grounds are perfectly maintained. Flowers grow between the markers. The cemetery emphasizes sacrifice, perseverance, and courage in the face of impossible odds. Both memorials honor brave men. Both commemorate heroism. But their stories are different. Omaha speaks of sacrifice despite poor planning. Juno speaks of success through superior tactics. For Canada, Juno Beach became central to national identity after World War II. Canada is not a superpower. It is not a massive nation like the United States or Russia. But at Juno Beach, Canada proved that excellence matters more than size. Canadian forces showed that a mid-sized nation with proper training and tactics could defeat a supposedly invincible enemy. Along with Vimy Ridge in World War I, Juno Beach became a defining moment in Canadian military history. Every year on June 6th, Canadians remember not just the sacrifice but the achievement. As historian Tim Cook writes, Juno Beach proved Canadians could not only fight but could outfight opponents with better tactics, training, and leadership. This became part of how Canada sees itself, a nation that punches above its weight through intelligence and preparation. Military historians have spent 80 years asking what-if questions about Omaha Beach. What if Americans had used Canadian tactics? What if they had landed tanks directly on the beach instead of trying to swim them in? What if they had used specialized armor to breach defenses? What if they had delayed H-hour by 10 minutes to account for currents? What if the naval bombardment had lasted longer? Studies and computer simulations suggest that using Canadian methods at Omaha could have saved hundreds of American lives. The defenses could have been breached faster. The advance inland could have started hours earlier. General Omar Bradley, who commanded American forces at Omaha, wrote in his 1951 memoir that pride prevented Americans from adopting specialized armor from their allies. He admitted that pride cost American lives. It is a painful admission from a respected general, but it is honest. Veterans from both beaches formed bonds that transcended national rivalry. At annual reunions, American and Canadian soldiers who fought on D-Day meet to share memories and honor the dead. The mutual respect is genuine and deep. American veteran Fred Hall says the Canadians accomplished the mission while we barely survived. That doesn't diminish our courage. It highlights their excellence. Canadian veteran Charlie Martin responds that the Americans at Omaha faced hell and kept coming. That's the definition of bravery. We had better tools, better tactics. They had nothing but guts. These men understand that different circumstances do not diminish anyone's courage. They all faced death that day. They all did their duty. Modern military forces around the world still use lessons from Juno Beach. Every amphibious assault since 1944 incorporates what the Canadians proved works. When American Marines landed at Incheon in Korea in 1950, they used specialized armor and combined arms tactics. When British forces retook the Falkland Islands in 1982, they emphasized junior leader initiative and flexible planning. When coalition forces invaded Iraq in 1991 and 2003, they landed armor directly on beaches and used specialized vehicles to breach obstacles. The United States Marine Corps has an official publication about amphibious operations. It explicitly cites Juno Beach as the model for how to conduct successful landings. Every Marine who trains for amphibious assault learns Canadian tactics from 1944. The lessons written in blood at Dieppe and proven at Juno Beach became the foundation of modern amphibious doctrine worldwide. For decades after the war, popular memory reduced D-Day to an American victory. Movies and television shows focused on American heroism, which was real and deserves recognition. But Canadian and British contributions were marginalized or forgotten. Steven Spielberg's 1998 film Saving Private Ryan brilliantly depicts the horror of Omaha Beach. Millions of people watched it, but the film never mentions Juno Beach. It never shows Canadian forces. For many viewers, Omaha Beach became the entire story of D-Day. Canadian veterans fought for recognition. They wrote letters. They gave interviews. They insisted their story be told. By the 2000s, scholarship finally corrected the record. Books and documentaries explained that Juno Beach was not just another landing. It was the most successful landing of D-Day, executed by a nation of 11 million people that proved tactical excellence matters more than size. The contrast between Omaha and Juno reveals a truth about war that applies to any human endeavor. Courage alone cannot overcome poor planning and inadequate tools. American soldiers at Omaha displayed extraordinary bravery under conditions that should have been impossible. Their courage deserves eternal respect, but Canadian soldiers at Juno demonstrated that preparation, innovation, and tactical excellence minimize casualties while maximizing success. Both beaches saw heroism. Both saw sacrifice. But only one saw a plan executed so well that by nightfall, the liberation of Western Europe had truly begun. The difference was not in the hearts of the soldiers. The difference was in the preparation of their leaders. Today, you can walk both beaches. At Omaha, tourists climb the steep bluffs that American soldiers struggled to capture under constant fire. They look down at the beach below and try to imagine the horror. The distance seems impossibly far when bullets are flying. At Juno, visitors can walk inland past the beach defenses, through the towns of Courcelles and Bernières, across 7 miles of Norman farmland. They can make this walk in an afternoon. Canadian soldiers secured all this ground in a single day of 1944. The grass grows green over both beaches now. The ocean waves roll in peacefully. The bunkers are empty. The guns are silent. But history remembers not just who fought, but how they fought, and why preparation and excellence saved lives, while bravery alone demanded payment in blood. In 1984, Brigadier Harry Foster of the Canadian 7th Infantry Brigade returned to Juno Beach for the 40th anniversary. He walked the sand where so many of his men died. He visited the cemetery where they rest. He spoke to reporters and said something that captures the meaning of what happened. At Juno Beach, we carried the weight of Dieppe on our shoulders. Every man who died at Dieppe taught us how to live at Juno. We didn't just fight harder, we fought smarter. That's the victory Canada contributed to the liberation of Europe. The proof that military excellence, not just military mass, could defeat tyranny. His words remind us that learning from failure is not weakness. Adapting tactics is not cowardice. And honoring the lessons purchased with blood is the highest form of respect we can give to those who died teaching them.